We're continuing our visit to Radha Kund and Shama Kund and the places surrounding. The idea is as we're bringing our attention to Radharani and Radha Kund, so great Vaishnavas have done this in the past, and at least a part of their life, in some cases a very significant part of their life, has been spent worshipping Radharani by worshipping Radha Kund. And we're going to visit a few places during this class where the little blue arrows show where we're going. Now this is supposed to be, this is the wrong one. This is where we went yesterday. Excuse me. We'll exit and go to the next one. Yeah. There we go. The last place we went was Gangamata Goswamini and her ashram and temple and her deities and the kirtan group there. That was in this area where the red little marker is. Gangamata Goswamini. Then we're going to go to these other places. As you see up here, number 9. It's a place where Bhaktivinoda Thakur had his Bhajan kutir. We visited one of his places earlier, but we didn't so much go into his life. And Bhakti Siddhanta, of course, stayed with him when they were together in Radha Kund. Right down here is Jagannath Mandir, right along the Parikrama path. And then we're going to visit Lalita Kund and another temple of Jiva Goswami where he did his bhajan, and then we'll end here. This is the Kund that's adjacent to Shama Kund, a bathing place that Jiva Goswami would use. So that's where we're going, starting up here, number 9, or Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Bhajan Kutir. So let's go forward. We're back on the Parikrama path. Now this is, at a 180-degree different angle, but you see where the arrow is taking us from that little congested section where there's many, many, many exalted Vaishnavas who resided, their Bhajan Kutir, etc., etc. Now we're going back to the Parikrama path and a little bit off the Parikrama path to Bhaktivinoda's Bhajan Kutir. As we pass along the Radha Kund and Shama Kund Parikrama path, you'll see several of these vendors of Tulsi beads of all kinds of descriptions. Of course, they have some other paraphernalia sometimes, but their primary focus is selling Tulsi beads. So if you're in need of Tulsi beads and you happen to be in the vicinity of Radha Kund, that's a nice place. There's certainly other places in Vrindavan, but it's a celebrated place. So now let's go to Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Bhajan Kutir. That's one of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's bhajans. And here is his Pushpa Samadhi. Bhaktisiddhanta's is to our left or to his right. Bhaktivinoda is in the center. And some more recent Acharya in Bhaktisiddhanta's line is at the other end. Here's a photograph of the type of chair. Sometimes you find chairs like this in Vrindavan or in India, really long extended arms. And on the right side is a little desk and his bed, and his walking cane and his shoes. So we'll start a little bit, spend some time with Bhaktivinoda Thakur and his life, because previously we didn't go over this. It gives the date of his birth and the date of his departure. So he lived a very mature life. Here you see him with a nice full beard, because during the Kartik month, the Chaturmasya period, he observed austerities, one of those being he didn't shave. But otherwise he was a clean-shaven man. And almost always when you see paintings of him, he has books on his lap and his beads on his hand. And these are the same two things, scriptures and japa, that we're given and we're to absorb ourselves in and take advantage of. His deities, unlike Srila Prabhupada's system of Gaur-Nitai, his deities were Gaur Gadadhar. Gaur Gadadhar. Gadadhar is on our right, or Lord Chaitanya's left. And the significance of this was his mood, of course, was preaching, but his mood was his personal mood was cultivating Raganuga Bhakti, and the increase of emphasis on internal cultivation, of course, along with the external extending of the mercy of Lord Chaitanya through Lord Nityananda. He was a worshipper of Gaur Gadadhar. Here's another photograph. Again, he's got a book on his lap, and he was concerned about people accepting his message by accepting him. And so he had different attire. And notice carefully, dangling from his vest pocket is a pocket watch. It was not very common during his time, but he followed this pocket watch system assiduously. I'm going to read something. It's I know a couple of devotees, husband and wife, both of whom are medical doctors, both of whom they have children, they have congregation that they attend to, and they have their sadhana and they have their preaching. In other words, they're super busy people. And I was visiting their home one time on the appearance day of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and this is what they wanted me to discuss, his use of time. So this is Bhaktivinoda Thakur's use of time from the Seventh Goswami. The book Seventh Goswami was titled that way because he did for Gaura Lila what the six Goswamis did for Krishna Lila, namely write books and establish the places of Krishna's pastimes. He was a pioneer in the restoring of the places of Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. Seventh Goswami. So in that book, here's a little section. I'm just going to read it. It's very nice. very regulated. Like we wouldn't be able to be regulated. Between 7:30 and 8 p.m. he would go to bed. He would then rise just before 10 p.m. Means 2 hours of sleep, or 2.5. Light his oil lamp and write his books until 4 a.m. This is how he was able to write 100 books. He had 6 hours in the complete still of the night. Then he would again rest for a maximum of a half an hour. So that's from 4 a.m. till 4:30, he would rest at maximum half hour. At 4:30, he would wash his hands and face, sit down and chant on his beads. He never showed his beads to anyone, but would chant on them constantly as time permitted. At 7 a.m., he answered all correspondence. At 7:30 a.m., he read various religious and philosophical works, and at 8:30 a.m., he received visitors. If any, visitors if any, or else continue to read until 9:30. So an hour reading or 2 hours reading, depending if there were visitors. At that time, he would walk back and forth on the veranda of his house, contemplating different religious questions and solving them in his mind. Sometimes he would solve them aloud, as if preaching to some unseen guest. He would rest briefly from 9:30 a.m. to 9:45 a.m. After 2 hours of rest at night, he took a 15-minute nap. Good luck, right? And then take bath and breakfast, which usually consisted of a half a quart of milk, 2 chapatis, and some fruit. At 9:55 a.m., he finished rest at 9:45, bath and breakfast finished in 10 minutes. Bath and breakfast finished in 10 minutes. Good luck, right? 9:55, the Thakur would don his uniform and leave for the court in his carriage. As a magistrate, he wore a coat and pants. Coat and pants. On his neck were 6 strands of large Tulsi beads. He was resolute in his court decisions and would decide a case immediately, not tolerating any humbug. He did his business and left. He shaved his head monthly and never cared what anyone thought about it. Lawyers and Englishmen were astonished by the Thakur's capacity for work. At 10 a.m., 5 minutes after he left in his carriage, that's when court began. He would hear between 30 and 50 cases per day. Doesn't sound like the court systems of India today, does it? Yet he finished by 1 p.m. What other magistrates took 1/2 hour, he finished in 5 minutes. He took another 2 minutes to write the judgment in detail. Some of his British supervisors became envious and tried to discourage him, but he was not affected. At 1 p.m. he went home. Apparently it's a 5-minute carriage ride from his home. Refreshed himself, and then returned to work from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. He went home. Every evening, after his court duties, Bhaktivinoda Thakur would translate some Sanskrit religious work into Bengali by dictating it to his secretary. Then there was an evening bath and meal consisting of a little rice, 2 chapatis, and another half quart of milk. So he was before his times, because most people didn't even know what clocks and watches were. But as this technology was developing in Europe, he picked up on it and used it in Krishna's service. In course of time, he became the High Court judge or chief magistrate in Puri, and there were 2 reasons why he was selected for that post. The British trusted him, and so they gave him a very high position in their government, because it wasn't just next to the governor of the state, the magistrate is next in line. So he was a very elevated position. And the second was he was fearless, and they knew it. So Bhishika Sain was a fellow, this isn't what he looked like, but I just picked an image off the internet. He had a big mop of hair on his head, and he was a yogi, and he was particularly vocal about getting the British out of India. So the British wanted to deal with him, but they wanted somebody else to deal with him. And so they wanted Bhaktivinoda because he was fearless. In addition to saying get British out of India, and that's his mission in life, he was also saying that he was an incarnation of Vishnu. And his sidekick was an Antashesh. And he would give teachings. People from Puri would go outside the city to his ashram or residence and hear his discourses. And eventually he started developing an interest in having ladies engage in rasa dance with him. And that was very disturbing to the men, because of the men, when the ladies came back and told their husbands what was going on, it became a big problem. And so Bhaktivinoda Thakur told his constables, bring him to court. And they refused to go because they were afraid. He was like this powerful mystic guy, and who he might do anything to harm them or their families. So courageously, Bhaktivinoda personally went. Following behind him were the constables, and he confronted Bhishika Sain just by asking him questions. And he said the things that he was always saying about the British government. And then he asked Bhishika Sain about his activities with ladies, and he didn't deny it. And so Bhaktivinoda said, you please come with me. We're going to have some trial in Puri concerning your activities. And Bhishika Sain had a mystic ability where he would shake his long hair and fire would come out of his hair. And all the constables stepped back, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur wasn't intimidated, and he personally grabbed him. At least one account says, at that point, Bhishika Sain said, this is one of my leelas, I'll go with you. In any case, he went to Puri, and he was put in jail awaiting his trial. And Bhishika Sain was doing a fast in protest of being arrested. And he started making curses, saying, the entire family of Bhaktivinoda Thakur will die for treating me this way. And his daughter, one of his daughters, contracted a very serious fever. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur's wife was concerned about her child. Said, please let him go. It's like, we can lose our daughter. And he was undeterred, very, very determined. She overcame her fever in course of time. And he was brought to trial, and in the course of the trial, Bhaktivinoda Thakur also had contracted a fever. It said his hand was shaking as he was writing the decision, but he moved on. He read the decision, and he was taken by the constables by the arm on both sides back to his jail cell, because some period of time he was put in jail. Before he left the courtroom, Bhaktivinoda Thakur had one of the constables get a big pair of scissors and cut his hair, because it is said that yogis store their power in their hair. And when his hair was cut, he fell to the ground. His power was gone. And in some number of days, he died. So that's the end of Bhishika Sen. But my fascination with this whole situation is the British government recognized his character, and his character was very fair and fearless. And there's other circumstances where his fearlessness was shown. Here's one of them. 1874, it came to his attention that the king had misappropriated 80,000 rupees, which is a lot. And so there was a penalty. And the penalty was the king had to feed Lord Jagannath, or pay the expense for Lord Jagannath's bhoga 52 times per day until that 80,000 rupees was discovered. Not discovered, recovered, replaced. The king was insulted, but above the king was the government, and a very powerful person in the government was chief magistrate. So he had no choice. So he accepted, and he was making these payments, but the king wanted to get back. And his idea was he wanted to kill Bhaktivinoda. But he thought just, having a thug murder him, that would cause too much turmoil in the country. And so he decided to do it a different way. By tantric process, there was an arrangement where 50 pundits engaged in a yagya, the end of which was to bring the death of Bhaktivinoda. The way that it works, apparently, is at the final mantra, this mystic effort bears fruit. So it came to Bhaktivinoda Thakur's attention, although it was done secretly, and he didn't do anything. And the way that his biography reads is the very day, the very last mantra, the only son of the king instantly died. Because these kind of tantric things, if it doesn't go to the intended person, it comes back to the person who sent it. So don't mess with Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He didn't have to do anything. Jagannath protected him. In fact, he commented about it afterwards. That, I had no fear because he knew what was going on, but he knew that Jagannath would protect him. That's Bhaktivinoda Thakur. There's another incident that's nice. There's another Babaji in Vrindavan, in Puri at the time, named Raghunath Das Babaji. And every day, Bhaktivinoda Thakur had a practice that he would go to the Jagannath Vallabha gardens which is the same place where Ramananda Roy would engage in his bhajan. And under the name of Bhagavata Samsat, he engaged in reciting and describing Srimad Bhagavatam. And it was very much liked by the people of Puri. Except this Raghunath Das Babaji took exception and he didn't disclose why, but he said, as far as he's concerned, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is not qualified, he's an impostor, and said offensive things about him and discouraged people from attending. So due to those offenses to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, after some time, short while, he contracted a very serious disease. And it looked like he was going, and going to die from that serious disease. Then Jagannath appeared in his dream. Jagannath has a way of appearing in people's dreams from time to time. I was thinking about it this morning. I wonder what his voice sounded like. How did they recognize it was Jagannath? Anyway. He instructed him, he said, "You've offended a great devotee of mine. And if you want to continue your life, you go and fall at his feet and beg his forgiveness. Otherwise, for sure, you're going to die shortly." When he woke up in the morning, Raghunath Das Babaji went directly to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, although he was very ill, and appealed to him for forgiveness, explained what his contemplations were and why he was doing it, and why he was speaking this way, why he said Bhaktivinoda Thakur is not a bona fide person to hear from. He was speaking from the Bhagavatam without wearing neck beads and without Vaishnav tilak. So how is this? So Bhaktivinoda's answer was, why is there some mistake on my part? Because I'm living the life of a Vaishnav, but I have yet to find Guru. Mahaprabhu has not sent Guru yet. And so Guru will give neck beads and tilak. And should I wear anyways? That would be pretense, wouldn't it? So when Raghunath Das Babaji understood why he was doing what he was doing, it made him feel even more sorry for speaking about Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Bhaktivinoda Thakur took no offense. In fact, he was able to cure Raghunath Das Babaji. He knew which medicine, etc. And he became well, and after some time, they became very dear friends and would discuss topics about Krishna together. Right there in Puri. There's a little section I also like in his biography about his dealing with Swarup Das Babaji. Swarup Das Babaji was a resident of Puri, and he was a very intense Vaishnav. He lived in a very simple residence, Bhajan Kutir place, and all day long he would engage in his bhajan. And in the evening, around 5, 6 o'clock, he would come out of his Bhajan Kutir and greet people who came to see him. Some of those people that came to see him, they brought Jagannath Prasad because he hadn't eaten the whole day and he had no other ways to maintain himself. And he accepted some small amount from them. And after spending time with the guests who had come, he went back into his Bhajan Kutir and resumed his bhajan until midnight. It's said that Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, in the evening, sometimes I would come to see him, and he would have very sweet in his speaking, and it gave him one consistent advice: never forget the name of Krishna. That's very strong. Made a very strong impression on me. Never forget the name of Krishna. And he went at midnight to take his bath in the ocean because he didn't want the situation to arise where some people would do some service for him. And then the question comes, Bhakti Minotaka writes, he was known to be blind in both eyes. So how was it that he made it at night, whether it's night or daytime, he's blind in both eyes, to the sea and make it back safely? And then he wrote, only Mahaprabhu knows. So he Bhaktivinoda Thakur, although a householder, here's the Sanskrit, Krishna Nam Bulibe Na. Never forget the name of Krishna. He's a householder with 10 children, but he's giving association and making friendship with Babaji's. He's, Gorkishore as Babaji as well. Because of his elevated consciousness, they recognized not by ashram, but by consciousness. At different times, Bhaktivinoda Thakur dressed in different manner to suit the occasion. We're going to see something shortly about Bhaktisiddhanta, who did the same thing. Bhaktisiddhanta learned his ways from his father. Very colorful attire and a pretty fancy hat. Here's a family photograph. Bhaktisiddhanta is up here. And as we know, he had 10 children. There's Bhakti Vinod. There's his good wife, Bhagavati. And there's his younger daughter. Remember the one that contracted fever. And a couple of assistants in the household, because that was the system at the time. But mostly sons. Here's a portrait of photograph, similar to the one you saw at the beginning, but he's known for his prolific writing. He wrote 100 books. 100 books. 100 books. It's astounding. And the range was vast as well, some in Sanskrit, some in Bengali, some novel-like, some just giving explanation of scriptures, the bhakti process, vast range, songs, amazing, prolific personality. One of those 100 books was this one. This is a reprint from the Chaitanya Saraswat Math, where as you know, 1896, the date of Prabhupada's birth, is when he sent to the West this Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, his life and precepts in English language. And at his own expense, he sent it around the world to different universities. He had one of his sons was Lalit Prasad, and to his son Lalit Prasad, he wrote a letter, which was essentially an autobiography, Swa Likita Jivani. That's the name of the book. And in the book, one of the things he describes is when visiting in Navadvip, the city that's they had the capital of that district of Nadia. He, from Rani Dharmshala, one evening, he saw in the distance an Adbhuta Mandir, a glowing, towering edifice in the middle of the rice fields. He was very surprised. Those who were with him, they also saw. The next day, he went to see the place, and he found the place. And, just followed the line that he was looking. And there was a patch of Tulsi Garden, a place where the Muslim agriculturists couldn't grow anything. They couldn't, it says specifically, they couldn't even grow eggplant or potatoes. So but spontaneously Tulsi grew there. The local sadhus confirmed that this place was the birthplace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he brought Jagannath Das Babaji, to visit the place. That's apparently a photograph, an actual photograph. This is the painting of that photograph. And he was brought to the place by his disciple, assistant, who brought him in a basket. And the celebrated event, he jumped out of the basket and said in Bengali in loud language, "This is the birthplace of Mahaprabhu. This is the birthplace of Mahaprabhu." Although he was infirm at 120 years of age, he jumped out of the basket. That's part of the narration. And as you see in the background, tigers and an elephant, it was jungly in this area. Some agricultural land as well. So he, at his own expense, he went home to home, house to house, asking for 1 rupee, which means he was inviting challenges, because there are people vested in Navadvip. Their livelihood was dependent upon that place being the birthplace of Mahaprabhu. Instead, he's saying it's another place. So that pink building on the right side, that was what was built as a temporary temple for Lord Chaitanya's birthplace. He then requested Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur to build the proper temple, which is the white structure there. And it's still present there. And on our right side, the road is on our left, and the temple is facing to our right. And the Adhoksaja Vishnu deity of Jagannath Mishra was found deep in the mud when they were excavating the foundation for the temple, confirming, in other words, that this is in fact the birthplace of Mahaprabhu. It's where Jagannath Mishra lived. After some time, he built a place, his Bhajan Kutir, at Svananda Sukhada Kunj. It's on the opposite shore of the Jalangi River. On the far right side, you see a little temple, and just to the right of that far right side is Bhajan Kutir, place of Jagannath, of Gorkishore Das Babaji. So he spent some time here as a magistrate in Krishna Nagar. And, it's a nice story, but the British government were so enthusiastic to have him there, they built a separate train track from his home to Krishna Nagar so he could come regularly. It's one of those narrow gauge train tracks. Only special trains can fit. But they had a great regard for Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And he envisioned the building of this Adbhuta Mandir that he saw. He read about it in Ananta Samhita and described it to the world and passed it on to Bhaktisiddhanta, who passed it on to Prabhupada. And that's a little summary of the life of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Obviously, he spent some time in Vrindavan, and some time in Vrindavan was spent by the side of Radha Kunda. And sharing that space with him sometime, when Bhaktivinoda Thakur would come, Bhaktisiddhanta liked to spend time with him as well. And this gives his birth date, and 1874. He was born as Bimla Prasad, and his family name was Datta. And this is his departure date. And which means he was almost, there's less than a month. There's a month separation from his becoming 53. So he left this world when he was 52. But very productive during his lifetime. There's lots to say about his life, but we don't have so much time. His full life is described in this book Rupa Vilas wrote, The Ray of Vishnu. The title comes from Bhaktivinoda Thakur praying to Jagannath that he send a ray of Vishnu because he felt it's too difficult to spread Krishna consciousness without an empowered person. So he prayed to Jagannath for such a person. And as a son, the celebrated two events. When he was born, around his left shoulder and right side, his umbilical cord was wrapped like a Brahmin's thread. And when he was just very, very small, because consider his birth date. The birth date is February 6th. So when is Jagannath Rath Yatra? July. You're just a few months old, 4, 5, 6 months old. And the cart of Jagannath stopped right in front of their house. And because Bhagavati was the wife of the chief magistrate, she had privileges. She wanted to get on the cart with her small child. They let her. She placed the child at the feet of Jagannath, and just as she did, a garland of Jagannath slipped from his neck and circled around Bhaktisiddhanta, small child. So that was taken as a signal that that's the ray of Vishnu that he was wanting. And he was his life was noteworthy subsequently. On a personal side, Bhaktisiddhanta's writing was the first Krishna conscious literature that I received. I've mentioned this many times. Here's a copy of the booklet, and a portion of that little booklet, the Vedanta, its morphology and ontology, became the subject of a Back to Godhead magazine, at least a portion of it, which I received. The first Back to Godhead magazine I received had that feature article. I read the article, and I was really moved by its contents. Very, very high English, but that's okay. The consciousness transformation was very amazing. As you see, it was published in a Back to Godhead magazine in 1969, and it was originally published on the appearance day of Bhaktivinoda Thakur in 1933, on the occasion of his appearance. Here's the logo that Bhaktisiddhanta devised for the Gaudiya Math. And of course, we see things that we expect to see. We see over here, there's a Mridanga, and there's Radha and Krishna under a tree, and there's Lord Chaitanya, and there's scriptures, and there's arti paraphernalia. But check this out. What's that? It's a printing press. Right on his logo. And that's the Brihat Mridanga, and that's the Mridanga. Brihat, big Brihat Mridanga. And of course, RT for the Lord. Don't see japa beads. I would expect that, but this is obviously it's by his design. He had a great fascination and love for the power of printing press, following his father's footsteps. When he was just 7, he was being trained by his father how to proofread things, and from there on, he showed him the whole process of publishing. When he was just 3 years old, celebrated event, he by mistake saw a mango and ate the mango before it was offered. And when his father came to know, he mildly rebuked him. What is this? You've taken that which hasn't yet been offered to the deity? This is not very good. And although he was just a small child and his father didn't speak in some heavy tones, he took a vow that for the rest of life he would not eat mangoes. And gosh, mangoes in Bengal during the fruit season, they're so abundant and they're so sweet. But for the rest of his life, when his disciples would sometimes bring mango, not knowing his vow, he would say, I'm an offender. I cannot take mango. Bhaktivinoda shifted from Puri at some point in time, not too long after his son was born, and moved to Calcutta. And at one place, while in Calcutta, they were again digging the foundation, and a Kurma deity was found. It was not necessarily this one, but a Kurma deity was found. And it was given for worship at 7 by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And at 7, he had memorized the entire Bhagavad Gita. The other day I was introduced to a small child that was really gifted at reciting slokas and this and that. And they got all nervous when it came before them. But Bhaktisiddhanta had this memory, didactic memory, that he could just memorize anything. Reading it once, it was memorized. So, but not only he could memorize all the verses of Bhagavad Gita, but he could explain for 10 minutes all the verses, any verse of Bhagavad Gita. When he was 13, his father gave him his japa beads. He gave him Mahamantra and a Shringa mantra. So it's a type of diksha. Well, he had no interest in becoming a householder, so he knew if I continue my studies, it's going to be expected after I complete my studies, I'll get married. So he made it very clear I don't want to get married in this lifetime. So instead, for 10 years or 11 years, he became a librarian for the king of Tripura, not far from Bengal. And this relationship with the king of Tripura was a lifelong relationship. They had a lot of appreciation for one another. And the king was a Vaishnav. It's said when he was acting as a librarian, he read the books in the library. And when we read something once, he memorized it just by reading it once. And then later in his writings, he would directly quote from Chaucer and Thoreau and different people that were in his library, just because he read it once. That's not most of us, right? We got our computer, and if we can't find it in a computer, we forget. That's me, anyways. But not Bhaktivinoda. He was prolific and powerful in his writing and powerful in his speaking. He very much followed his father with the publication of books, which is a Yukta Vairagya principle, taking mechanization and engaging it in Krishna service. Here's a celebrated photograph. he's in Vrindavan. And the sadhus are not supposed to ride ride in conveyances, like a palanquin or something. So what to speak of conveyances, you got a convertible. And drove through the streets of Vrindavan, waving at people, Haribo, Yukta Vairagya. At the same time, he could dress very simply, and at the same time, he could dress very elaborately, depending upon the circumstance. This is a painting of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur at his place in Puri. He spent a fair amount of time in a secluded place in Puri for meditation on Krishna. Now, because of time, I left this slide blank to go through some standards of Bhaktisiddhanta's teaching, but it's already 9:22, and I don't think I'm going to do that because of time. Yeah. There's whole collections of books with very, very powerful short statements on practically any subject. His responding in questions and answers to difficult questions and powerful answers. He was known for that. He was called the Shringa Guru, meaning, he would challenge upstarts. And if a person was an upstart, they saw him coming along the street, they'd go to the other side because they didn't want to be confronted, and he didn't leave any stone unturned. A very powerful acharya. It said he wanted to make a statement that the Bhagavatam is replete in meaning. So 1 month in Dhaka, he spent the whole month speaking on one verse, 111 Bhagavatam, every day, and never repeated his ideas. I mean, incredible personality. In 1933, this was the year that the devotees were sent. Actually, Rabindra Swarup Prabhu made this very clear. There was for many years there was a plan to send his preachers to the West, but it was being held up because Bhaktisiddhanta wanted a comprehensive text that would give in English, would give people in the West an understanding of Lord Chaitanya and his teachings. So here it says volume 4 is a very thick book. Sri Krishna Chaitanya. Now there's digital versions available. I don't know if there's printed versions presently available. But it's a very comprehensive description of Lord Chaitanya's life and his teachings by Professor Sanyal. I mean, it says that the book Nishikant Sanyal. He was a professor at a university in Orissa. Bhaktisiddhanta had the greatest admiration for him. In fact, he would have him edit or proofread or prove things just because he was so spot on with his scholarship. But it's very, very comprehensive. So off they went. This was published in March. And in May, off they went to London. His followers with resources from some of the other Gaudiya Math centers. And of course, we know they didn't make a whole big splash. They came back after some time. But a very important wing of his preaching effort. Here's a photograph of an event that took place in Navadvip in Navadvip, he regularly went with massive Sankirtan. Now, the local people in Navadvip, they didn't like him. Some people didn't like him because he had established that in other places, the birthplace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he cut into their livelihood. And so they had a plot to kill him as he was going through the streets. So what happened is the hired men that were approaching him, the devotees understood these men are coming to kill him. So there was one householder who pulled Bhaktisiddhanta to the side, and they changed clothes. The householder wore his sannyas attire, and Bhaktisiddhanta wore his householder attire, and they snuck him away. And it hit the news, the local, Navadvip Gazette. It's written up in the local papers what had happened. And the constables caught the men that were involved, and the constables went to Bhaktisiddhanta and said, "Do you want to press charges?" And he said, "No. How could I have gotten so much publicity otherwise?" So he was thanking them, and he took no exception. Now here's this limousine again. Here's Bhaktisiddhanta meeting with John Anderson, the governor of Bengal. Now this was a big deal. It's written up as a big deal because it was a big deal. At the time, Bhaktisiddhanta was living in a jungle. I mean, he was living at the Chaitanya Mutt, but it was a jungle. It's described by his followers. I just recently saw a little video how it was described. Grass hut, straw roof, in a jungle. He somehow, Bhaktisiddhanta, it was arranged that the governor would come. So for the governor to come, there had to be a way to get there because there's no bullock cart paths or anything. So he made a road. And later, Bhaktisiddhanta said that was my intention, to get him to come so we could have a road. And it worked. And that road was then later used to bring paper from Calcutta and take away all the printed material that had been printed at their printing presses at Chaitanya Math. But notice, now maybe it's photoshopped or something, but he's not wearing a saffron sannyas dhoti. He's wearing something else with, a little border around the edge. And, it's another one of his matching the circumstance, dressing according to circumstance, as Bhakti Vinod Thakur did. This is a photoshopped image of that photograph of his face, see? Another celebrated event is Bhaktisiddhanta walking around the Radha Kund with his followers. There's Prabhupada as a householder with his son in his hand. Bhaktisiddhanta lamenting that as soon as we had acquired this very expensive marble temple in Calcutta, it's brought quarrel amongst my followers who wants which room. Better to sell the marble and print books. And he told Prabhupada, just in the course of a conversation, if you ever get money, print books. And so just that conversation had a lot of power and an impact on Prabhupada's life, isn't it? I mean, he knew what Bhaktisiddhanta wanted, but there's an explicit instruction. We're almost done with his life. This is something that I like very much. Bhaktisiddhanta saying that Harikatha is the Swarup Shakti of Harinam, which is the Swarup of Krishna. The form of the holy name is the form of Krishna, and Harikatha is the Swarup Shakti of Krishna. Just as we don't worship Krishna alone, we worship Krishna with Radha, we also don't worship the name without Harikatha. And this is the final slide here on Bhaktisiddhanta. God is the shelter of all. He sends so many obstacles and inconveniences to those who wish for shelter under him in order to test their ardor and steadiness. So in case you find yourself getting tested sometime, you can remember Bhaktisiddhanta's words. Now, here's the next place we're going to visit. It's already 8:32. Let's see what happens. I hope I can finish. From where Bhaktivinoda Thakur was, for his Bhajan Kutir, you see that where the arrow starts, just down the path, again along the path around Shamakund, is a Jagannath temple. And because not only the Bengalis but the Orient devotees were great followers of Lord Chaitanya, and they liked very much Radha Kunda and Krishna Bhakti, so they established a small temple here. I thought to illustrate this as images, some of you may know, when Lord Chaitanya stayed for 4 months of the rainy season in Sri Rangam, he personally, with his own hand, because I was told this by the descendant of Venkatabhatta, Parashara Bhatta, that he, with his own hand, carved Jagannath, Baladev, and Subhadra deities, and they look like this. And just down the street from where he stayed for 4 months, and across the street, is a temple of Lord Jagannath. So here's some photographs of the deities. They look a little different than the Jagannaths that we're accustomed to see. And notice the different turbans that they're wearing. There's a certain style. And Radharani also. Look at her hat. And Balaram, Jagannath, and Subhadra's very fashionable hats. Here's the sign in that local place. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, during his pilgrimage to the south, performed here Chaturmasya in 1510. Here's the Garuda Stamba at the outside of the temple. And here's another photograph of the deities inside the temple. Next, we're going just down a little bit, just a little bit. And on our right side, here's some more places where they have Tulsi Mala, many vendors with many varieties of beads to choose from. And when they see Hare Krishna ISKCON devotees come along, the price doubles or triples. It's business. So if you can find a local person to do the bargaining for you, you're better off. Just outside his place, there's samadhis of many sadhus. And now we're going to go inside. This is the temple area, mandap. And down there on the far right side is the temple door. And inside the temple door are his deities. On the left side and the right side is his sitting place. Now these are the deities of Radha Damodar that are found in Jaipur, because the deities were taken to Jaipur. These are the deities that are on the main altar, and very nice features. And the deity that Jiva Goswami actually worshipped and were hand carved by Rupa Goswami is this deity here. Here's a closer up photo. And here's what Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote. Now we're going to the next place. Just near my kutir is Lalita Kund, surrounded by hundreds of bejeweled altars. At that place, Sri Radha Krishna can be seen continuously sporting as they expand their pastimes. This is taken directly from one of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's writings. So you see the map at the bottom left. That's where Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Bhajan Kutir is. We passed by the place of Jiva Goswami's temple in Bhajan Kutir, and now we're going to Lalita Kund. Lalita Kund is a place that's celebrated. On the other side are not yet finished kunds of the other Ashtasakis, but Lalita Kund, because of her prominence, is finished. And she, Lalita and Radha, engaged in water sports with Krishna regularly at Lalita Kund, and there's various paintings depicting this. And this painting is presumably is at Radha Kund, but in this area there's nice swing where Radha and Krishna would swing. And please note, there's another personality on that swing with Radha and Krishna, and that's Lalita, because Lalita was as dear to Krishna as Radha was because of their nearness and dearness to one another. There's a nice little passage from Leelastika. I'm going to read if I can find it quickly. But this painting is meant to illustrate. Yeah, here it is. The 7th verse of Leelastika. I offer my obeisances to Lalita, who has many wonderful qualities. She requests every girl in Vraja to join the party of Vrishabhanu's daughter, and who fulfills all desires of that girl. So she's very dear to Radharani, and she would encourage, as you see in this painting. This is a Dhriti painting, very nice. There's Radha and Krishna on the left, and Lalita is inviting some young gopi or gopis to come before Radha and Krishna to enjoy their direct association. There she has a peacock fan, and she's being encouraged to come forward. Don't be shy. Take this opportunity to render some service. And it's a very beautiful painting. It's a very beautiful painting. Now, her residence, I think we're going to be, Bhakti Chaitanya Swami is going to be taking us to the places of the Ashtasakis. They're all surrounding Varsana. Varsana is in the middle here. And Unchagaon is the place of Lalita up here, geographically. But, the Ashtasakis are all just like this, all surrounding Varsana. Very nice. A little bit further away, Kadamba Kandi. He's going to take us there also, I think. Here's a little bit about Lalita's nature and her life. It's described that she was of this Vama Prakara, we hear that term. If you read, as you read further, you'll come across this term a lot. She was hot-tempered and argumentative and haughty, and she would say contrary things in defense of Radharani and lovingly to Krishna. She is dressed in this manner, with this peacock dress, and she's commonly seen together with Lalita, Vishaka, wearing a blue dress, and Radharani commonly in a red dress, red sari. She was a leader amongst the Ashtasakis. The Sanskrit term that's applied to her is also Kandita Bhava. Kandita Bhava is when she found, it's in a female, when she finds that her lover, in this case when Krishna and his dealings with Radha seems to have been unfaithful, she becomes very angry. It says her lips curl and she speaks really strongly. Or she becomes despondent or morose. Now, Radha would go through those emotions also, and Lalita would reflect those emotions of Radha and support with the dearest affection her dearest Radharani. At the same time, she was very much loved by Krishna, and he gave her facilities and encouragement, and she was very expert at both arranging the meeting of Radha and Krishna, and when there is a dispute, to inflame the dispute. She's a very intimate person. It's said when they were engaged in activities together, she would stand right there, shameless. She's just so closely associated with Radharani. Regularly, she would bring camphor and tambula for Krishna, and for Radha, she'd make flower garlands. This is the stairway leading up to her temple in Unchagaon. It's up on a hill, as you can see, long set of steps. This is the temple area itself, and here's the deities, Radha Krishna. So it's a very intimate associate of Srimati Radharani. By the side of the Litakund, there's a small temple where it's called the Temple of Lalita Bihari. There's the deities of Lalita Bihari. She's by the side of Krishna. And this is our last slide. This is an artist's depiction of the two Radha Kund, Shama Kund, although it's not symmetrical or the exact shape. And kunjas of the cowherd boys and kunjas of the Ashtasakis. Okay, so we have, it's 8:44. Now, how are we doing with the technology? Is it working? You don't know. Not working. Ready tomorrow. Okay. We're testing the technology to see if the 4 different languages can go side by side with the English language. Big challenge. In theory, it sounds okay. Then in practice, it's like, what? Any comments or questions? If not, I could read some more about Lalita. She's an attractive personality.
Curiosity question, but we can go ahead with reading.
Take the microphone. One question will stimulate other questions. That's usually how it works.
So, Maharaj, you mentioned that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur wore 6 strands of Tulsi beads. So I was curious to know what the 6 strands indicate.
I don't know of any reason other than they were large. He wanted people to see that he's a Vaishnava.
And when deities are excavated, so their names are already, they know, or they are
Who?
named afterwards.
Who?
When deities are excavated from the ground or somewhere, any kind of deities.
It's probably different in each case. Without going into, for example, this and that and that. They have different names according to circumstance.
In Untitled Temple, Maharaj, there was one very small deity by the side of Radha and Krishna. So I was just...
It looks like a Gopal deity. Bal Gopal, looks like.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Maharaj, it's about the Jagannath appearing in the dream. This is a comment, Maharaj, like when it appears in your dream, let us know what kind of dress he is wearing also, Maharaj.
You want to know which dress Jagannath is wearing when he appears in a dream? That's your question? You have to ask the person who has the dream what dress he was wearing.
I believe someday he will appear in your dream and you let us know, Maharaj.
I don't understand what you're saying. You're saying I had a dream, and when he does appear in my dream, I'll let you know what dress he was wearing? Is that what you're saying? I haven't had such a dream. I'll keep you posted.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Guru Maharaj, for the live biography of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Lalita Sakhi a little bit. I wanted to comment on Bhaktivinoda Thakur. I was appreciating that when he was so-called punishing the Raja of Puri for misappropriating the funds, he gave a punishment to feed Lord Jagannath 52 times a day.
Fantastic.
And that's such a wonderful punishment. I'm like amazed at his...
Brilliant. It's brilliant.
That's actually so loving.
Yeah. I mean, supposing you get the opportunity, can I have the opportunity to feed Lord Jagannath once out of... Yay, I will. Yeah, it's great fortune. Yeah, he's brilliant.
So just wanted to appreciate Bhaktivinoda Thakur for his
he's brilliant.
loving compassion, even in punishment.
Yeah.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Yesterday after the lecture, Shivram Prabhu explained me that Vaishnavas found all these places 500 years or so back. Sorry if I'm misquoting you, Shivram Prabhu. Is that correct, that Vaishnavas found all the...
But the details is not 500 years ago. We'll be hearing, we have been hearing, where personalities came. They knew this is Radha Kund, they knew that's Shama Kund, and they found their Bhajan kutir around the circumference of the two, according to their desire and circumstance and so forth. But the finding of Radha Kund was, we'll hear it tomorrow morning, was an arrangement of Lord Chaitanya himself. And prior to Lord Chaitanya, it was lost. Where is Radha Kund, Shama Kund? It was lost to the world. And he declared, this is it. And he gave a similar empowerment to Rupa and Sanatan to do the same elsewhere. And they did. But, there's some detail that says, in addition, Raghunath Das Goswami established some number of places. And we narrated one of those stories. One of those stories was the Malihari Kund, which is, looks like an algae pond. And, it's a part of surrounding Radha Kund. It's a very special place. Now, it's not developed like some of these other places look developed. So they identified. There's another sadhu who will, you won't be hearing something about him. He's a Vaishnav from South India, and he came to Vrindavan. I'm trying to remember his name. And he wrote a book on places of pastimes of Krishna, and some few hundred places. He found deities, and he found the places, and
Maharaj, my I guess overall question was like, I grew up few hours from Dwarka, and even there, like, nobody knows exactly where real Dwarka was. It's an ocean. And then in India, there's this long thing about Ram, Janmabhoomi. So like all the incarnations of Krishna, those places are lost and then refound. Is there any theme behind it, or it's just...
is there any what behind it?
A theme or...
Theme?
Yeah.
Behind finding or losing?
Yeah, when they are lost, I mean, they are such important places, yet in history they are not maintained and then refound.
So, but I can say anything, but what your specific question is, what was the basis, or why did it happen?
Yeah. Yeah, why they got lost?
Because it gets lost because of time. In time, people forget. During a certain period of time, there was remembrance, and after some time, there's forgetfulness. So, generation after generation, they may remember, they may not remember, or they may even distort what the previous generation or generations had to say. So it takes fidelity to scripture and sadhus that have capacity to contact truth that's beyond time. And there are sadhus that have that capacity. So we take authority from those personalities, from scripture and such sadhus.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Okay, it's 9 o'clock. We'll end. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.